Good evening, everybody. Welcome in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Educator Summit, the Inquiry Educator Summit 2022. My name is Chris Stevenson. Thanks to Liz Dawes, Jura Singley, and Andrea Rose Shadiva for joining us at this Leadership Masterclass session. As we wait for others to join us, we'd love to know where you're joining us from. Please put down your name and your city in the chat box and make sure to click on all panelists and attendees as you do this. Oh, wow. Gosh, and all of a sudden the screen came alive. Wow. We have Florida, USA. Excellent. Hi, Jade. I'm right here with you. And then we jump all the way to Melbourne, Australia. Gosh, Saigon, Vietnam. Hello from California. Hi, Michelle. Hello from Indianapolis, Minneapolis. Good to see you, Cindy, all the way from South Korea. It's pretty late over there. Or is it very early in the morning? It's very early in the morning. Good morning from Tokyo. Hello from India. Oh gosh, hi, Austin, Texas. Beautiful to see so many people from across the world. Gosh, I've just gone around the world in literally a minute. I'm so excited to see you all here today. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. So next slide, please, if you would. So let's just begin by looking at some housekeeping points for our session. In this masterclass, we cannot hear you. So please type your questions under the question tab on the right of your screen. At various times, we're going to ask you to pause and reflect. All access attendees on the platform can use the chat feature to interact as shown on the image. For everyone else watching on YouTube, please feel free to drop your chat questions into the chat. This webinar has been independently created and is not endorsed by the International Baccalaureate. Next slide. The Inquiry Educator Summit is a community initiative by Toddle. Toddle is a teaching and learning platform which helps teams connect on curriculum planning, portfolios, assessment reports, and a whole host of other things. They have actionable resources that teachers can take back into their classrooms, and hosted in Toddle Learn, you will find all sorts of amazing resources. In case you're interested in that, subscribe to the Toddle Learn newsletter, and they will send you interesting resources to your email every week. That's going to be in the chat window to be able to access that link. They also do a lot of community professional-led events, such as this one. The main objective of these events is to get teachers from the classroom to share learnings with peers from all around the world, like we have just seen here this evening, and for us to learn and grow together. Next slide, please. And finally, don't forget, as we are a global community, to share all of your learnings with us and our speakers. Share from this session using the hashtag ToddleTies on all of the media platforms you see in front of you and across all of our social media. And now over to Liz and Andrea for inquiry-driven innovation.
Hey, well, welcome everybody. I'm Andrea Sachdeva, and Liz will wave as well. I'm sure you can see her as well. We're so delighted to have this time with all of you, whether it's morning, noon, or nighttime where you are. So thank you so much for joining us. And our title, our session today is entitled Inquiry-Driven Innovation, Practical Strategies for Promoting Change in Schools. So we hope you'll be excited about some of the information and tools and things like that that we're going to share today. But we wanted to start off by sort of quickly addressing the conference theme that you've probably heard about a lot already if you've been to some of the other sessions that have been happening for the past couple of days. And that's this theme of limitlessness. And, we really want to think today, due to the focus of the session, about how educational innovation can be a vehicle to sort of push past or push through some of the limits that we find in our own educational contexts and our own work lives. And this is something that Liz and I are really excited about because it's very personal for us as well. We are both former educators and working as education researchers now. And I know for myself, I worked in out of school time programming and after school programming for many years. And one of the limits that I often felt to sort of changing practice and innovating in my work was really just lacking some of that mental space and time to think about what was next. I was so absorbed in getting everything done that had to be done on a day-to-day basis that just finding that mental energy to think about what's next was always a big limit and challenge in that work. And Liz, how about for you? Do you want to share something as well?
Oh, I'll just quickly say I started my career as a high school teacher in England and then in Australia. And I think a level of comfort comes with doing things the way that you think you know them, that are tried and true. And sometimes I felt like I and some of my colleagues were a bit reluctant to kind of push past what we knew would work, a little bit fearful about what might lie on the other side. Thank you.
Thanks. And so that's a little from us, but we'd really love to kick things off today by hearing from those of you who are participants today, whether that's on YouTube or through the Toddle platform. And we're really curious to hear from you about thinking of your own work in education. What are some things that limit innovation in your own context? And we're going to cross our fingers here and hope that the tech works, but you should be able to contribute to a collaborative word cloud, either by scanning this QR code or typing that web address in. And I will advance to the next slide so we can hopefully see this in a minute, but the web address will still be up there. So we'll give folks a couple of minutes to kind of do that. If you're thinking about your own work in education, what are some things that limit innovation in your own context? Great. I can already see some folks adding here. This is exciting to see what's coming up for you. I see things coming up like competition, time is really standing out as well, curriculum, absolutely. Interesting, some things around parents involved with your educational context. Turnover as well. That's something that we've heard quite a lot in this work. Wow. Status quo, budget, standards, just that general feeling of uncertainty and fear. Yeah. Exams, lessons, everyone being overworked, grading. Wow, fantastic. So I'm going to keep moving us on here, but I encourage you to keep adding if you want. And this word cloud will remain live. So if you don't get time to soak it in all right now, since there's so much coming in, I encourage you to keep that tab open so you can go back and kind of see how it's evolving. Fantastic. And just to say that I think it's really interesting that some of the things that you all have mentioned that are in the session today are things that we heard a lot from some educators that Liz and I and some other members of our research team worked with on a 2-year research project that was part of Project Zero Research Center at Harvard Graduate School of Education. And this was research that was done with 7 schools in the United Arab Emirates that were operating on a lot of different curricula from around the world, with a bunch of different budgets and sort of overall school philosophies and approaches, amounts of students, a huge diversity among these 7 schools. And these were just some of the things that stood out to them in terms of the limits that they felt were holding them back from innovating. And it's really interesting because I think some of those came up from all of you as well just a moment ago. And so today we're going to share a research-based framework and some related professional development tools and try some of those out quickly as well. And we developed those tools with the educators in that research project. And we developed this framework to help them move beyond some of those limits that they were finding in their work and to create some changes in practice through an approach that we call inquiry-driven innovation. And you can see how we describe it right there, an ongoing process that empowers both individuals and communities to pursue school-based change that's relevant and responsive to local context. And we'll talk a lot more about that throughout the session. Liz and I published a book on this last year called Inquiry-Driven Innovation, a practical guide to supporting school-based change, and we'll be looking at some of the resources from that throughout the session as well. And by the way, we just sort of want to put out there that what Liz and I are doing today, which is a lot of, us quite literally leading the conversation because we actually can't hear you, as Chris mentioned at the beginning, and just sort of really setting the agenda for the day. That's not really in line with the inquiry-driven innovation approach, but it is sort of a prerequisite for doing this type of a masterclass session. So we ask you to just please bear with us here for the day. And as I mentioned, we had a great diversity amongst the schools that we were working with. These are just some pictures of those schools. And at the bottom right, you can see a photo of the initial cohort of educators that we were working with as well. And these ideas were developed across all of these schools, but for the purposes of doing an illustration of some of the tools and ideas that we'll talk about today, we're just going to zoom in on one of those schools in particular, and it's called GEMS Modern Academy. And it's based in the Emirate of Dubai, again, in the United Arab Emirates. It's a school that has about 3,700 students and over 230 educators, pre-K through 12, and runs the Indian ICSE curriculum as well as IB curriculum in their school. And as we were working with them through this research project called Creating Communities of Innovation, this school in particular was part of a cohort of schools that agreed to go through a journey of looking for opportunities for innovation by taking on what we would think of as an inquiry stance, or basically an approach to learning and reflecting that was very much deeply rooted in observing, listening, slowing down, looking around them, in order to find some of these opportunities for changes in practice and for innovation. And then this group, as well as groups in the other school, formed a study group where they were getting together weekly and thinking of opportunities for innovation in their school that surfaced from some of that looking around and some of those inquiry approaches that we'll try out a bit later in the session. And they developed those into innovation projects or specific changes in practice that they wanted to see in their school. Pilot tested those, tried them out, learned from them over time, and eventually got to the point of scaling and spreading that work. So we're going to look at a few key parts of that story as we go through the session today. But right now, we're going to start right at the beginning of that story in terms of looking around at a context that was very familiar. For this school, it was very familiar to them, but they tried to look at it as though they were seeing it for the first time. And we're actually going to get a chance to try that out a little bit now. So I'll pass things over to Liz for that.
Great, thank you, Andrea. So many of the techniques that we used built on work that already existed at our research center, Project Zero. And the activity we started the process with, and which we're going to show now, is called Slow Looking. And it builds on some of the work of our colleague, Shari Tishman, and some other work that I've been involved in. And slow looking is a deceptively simple concept, but it involves really taking the time to look in a very intentional way at your surroundings, really taking the time to dig into detail and start to look at where you work or where you live with fresh eyes. Next slide. And what we're going to do now is we're going to practice doing this with a photograph. Now, in reality, our cohort members were doing this in their schools, but we thought it would be fun for you to get a bit of a flavor of how this tool works by trying it out on a photograph from the GEMS Modern Academy, which you should see now on the screen. If we could have the Padlet link posted in the chat, that would be terrific. And so we're going to ask you to go through this exercise and post kind of your impressions on the Padlet. The first thing you're going to do, and this will seem like quite a long time, you're going to look very slowly and carefully at this picture for about 3 minutes. I might make it slightly less. You can look at the overall image as a whole. Maybe think, what about this looks familiar to me? Or, what about this looks unfamiliar or surprising? And then I invite you to try zooming in to a detail in the picture and maybe looking at kind of corners of the picture that your eye might not be immediately drawn to. If you could post some of the things, you don't have to post everything you see, some of the things in the Padlet in the first column, I think you'll see that other people will notice things that you don't notice immediately yourselves. So I'm putting the timer on now. I invite you to look really closely and intentionally at this photograph, and please put some of your things you're noticing on the Padlet. I'm seeing things popping up and the Padlet. Please keep looking, and if possible, try and write down what you're observing, maybe not jumping to interpreting what you're seeing. So what are you noticing or seeing? There's some great observations coming up in this Padlet. Here's one that I hadn't noticed, lots of empty space on the high part of the wall, not at the eye level of the students. A few of these out, students in different uniforms. Instructions on the board for reference. Displays, different size tables, groupings. It looks like the teacher is working with one of the groups. Looks like all the students are engaged. I mean, obviously, and that's the timer. Obviously, some of this, when you're looking at a static photograph, is a bit difficult to see. The teacher is not at the desk. Looks like a collaborative classroom setup. So great, some great observations there. And in fact, our modern teachers went on tours around their school and together collectively started to look with fresh eyes at their school. Andrea, can we have the next slide, please? Now what I'd like you to do is to think, from these things that we've seen here, and I know that you have never visited this school, I'd like you now to write a list of questions or wonders that you have about what you've observed. What kind of questions are coming up for you? What more would you like to know about what's going on in this classroom? And again, please use the Padlet and the second column to note that down. Oh, I see we've already got some. Okay, great. And people are going, that is great. How old are the students? How much time did it take for them to build up this learning routine? What are the students working on? Where is it? How would this work now with social distancing? Right, very true. This photograph precedes COVID. Why are the grouping sizes different? Why is there a lot of printed work on the walls instead of student work? Where are the chairs in the middle section? Interesting. Did the students choose their groupings? Great. And I invite you to keep posting those, but we'll move on for the sake of time because we haven't, we want to make sure we get to the rest. Okay. And then obviously we're doing this on speed dial here, but then after the activity, our teachers at GEMS Modern then reflected on what they thought they'd learned from doing this activity, especially doing the activity together, and started to ask themselves, from what we've seen here, what might be some implications for our work? Right, eventually, we'll talk about this now, this led into their wonderings about what innovations might be appropriate. And in a longer version of this tool, which we have available on our book website and is in the book, an optional thing is to think about details that were observed during this exercise and then to connect them to bigger systems that are going on in the school. For example, the seating arrangements, the furniture, how does this connect to bigger practices within the school or ways of doing things? And eventually, how might those be disrupted or innovated on? Great. And I'll just, Andrea's putting up the QR code if you would like to get hold of this tool. As I said, it is available for free. And I'm just looking at some of the new insights that some of you have posted that you gain from this, right? Reminding yourself about slowing down and observing what's going on. Slowing down enables me to be more reflective as an educator, right? I know from my own experience, schools are busy, so it really takes some intentionality to slow down. Somebody's put about re-looking into my classroom to use the space appropriately or maybe differently. Also looking at a context through multiple lenses, right? The beauty of this is having more than one person look at a space and see different things. I invite you to keep posting, but thank you for jumping into that activity, and that sets the stage for what Andrea is now going to share.
Great, thanks. And again, if you're interested to see the full version of the tool, it is available for free, and there's the web address and the QR code if you're interested in accessing that. So as we mentioned, we're just sort of dipping into little pieces of this larger school story, which is much more complex than what we can get into here today. But as Liz was talking about, these educators that were working at Modern Academy, they use tools like slow looking, also things like interviewing and just talking and listening to different folks and doing observation in a variety of ways to really look at their environment as though they were seeing it for the first time and to surface some opportunities and inspirations that might help them get on the path toward innovating and changing practice in their school. So they kind of took a step back early on in this process to think about what are we learning from these observations and from some of this listening. And we asked them through the use of a professional development tool, which is again on our Tuttle booth, you'll be able to download it, but also through the book website, and it's of course in the book as well. But we asked them to go through this protocol that we call wishes, challenges, and opportunities, and think about from what they had seen and what they had documented through these observations, what were some wishes that they had for their school? What were some things that, you know, just really stood out to them that I want to make this happen in my own context? And you'll see some of these things here that they wanted to get together and start to analyze data more, but in a very collaborative way. They wanted to have a big impact on student learning. And they also surfaced through that some of their challenges, things that were mentioned at the beginning of the session by all of you, things like time management and staff turnover. But they were also able to reflect on some opportunities to build on what already existed in their school, including some of the folks that could be champions of this work and help them to push innovations forward, as well as accessing and building on some of the existing professional development networks in their school. So they came up with a lot of these things in terms of inspirations for things that they wanted to do to change practice in their school. And before we tell more about what that actually led to in terms of innovation at Modern, we wanted to invite you to just take maybe 2 minutes to think about a wish, a challenge, and/or an opportunity for your own work in education. And we'd invite you to drop your thoughts on one or more of those things into the chat. A wish you have for your work in education, a challenge or question you want to tackle, or an opportunity to build on what's already around you. Just take a couple minutes for that.
A lot is coming in the chat. Jade says,
yeah,
I'm
seeing that, Shambly. Yeah. Gosh, the lag kind of caught me off guard there. But yeah, massive amounts in terms of thinking about the wishes to reduce the workload of our teachers this year. Yes, I completely see that myself in my own professional life with schools. As a coach, Cindy's saying, as a coach, I have the opportunity to collaborate with teachers on their own goals and slow down with them, looking at data and reacting to student needs. So even that, with that reduction of workload, thinking about how we can possibly best work together and collaborate given the time that we have. Rachel says that she would hope to focus with the staff on the true meaning of inquiry-based learning and take steps to ensure everyone has a deep understanding so that it can be used effectively. Gabriella, you're hearkening to something I wish for being in the United States. I wish I had more flexibility regarding the curriculum. And that's something that certainly is a major challenge across some aspects of our educational map. A few wishes that are out there. Kristen says that she wishes that students love learning in her class. But she says that the challenge is that it's balancing that inquiry and that content and the assessment during the lessons as well. And Lisa, just to end up, an opportunity to build through considering how we can use professional curiosity groups to enhance collaboration and innovation at school. I love that. To build professional curiosity groups. What a wonderful way of putting that.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing some of those. And thank you, everyone, for contributing your voice to this. This is, although we can't, I hear or see you, this is making it feel a little bit more like inquiry-driven innovation than just Liz and I talking here. So it's wonderful to hear some of those. And before we move on, we just wanted to share a little bit more about how that actual process of innovating went forward at Modern Academy. We shared some of the slow looking that they did, as well as some of the wishes, the challenges, and the opportunities that came up for them. But if you're curious to know how did this actually lead to school change and lead to innovation in classrooms, this school actually developed 3 different innovation projects out of those starting inspirations. One was to use Project Zero, which is the research center where Liz and I work, to use these short protocols that help to routinize different habits and ways of thinking in the classroom. They use those thinking routines in their classrooms for the first time, and also ended up integrating thinking routines with design thinking approaches, which you might be familiar with, to create a new problem-solving curriculum for their school. And they also created an interdisciplinary after-school program at the school. And if you're hearing these innovations, you might be thinking, well, I've heard of something that sounds like that before, or maybe you've done some of these things in your own classroom. You know, is that an innovation? I thought that an innovation sort of changes everything and is completely disruptive. And we just like to pull out the point that not every innovation has to be sort of earth-shattering and changing everything that's already there. A lot of the schools that we did work with in this research actually ended up implementing what we would think of more as everyday innovation or incremental innovation, where they were making what would be sort of smaller changes in practice. But we think that what's really powerful about it is that even though these were smaller changes or things that had been tried out elsewhere, they were put into place in a way that was really responsive to what these educators saw going on around them. And for that reason, they were still able to have a really big impact on classrooms and on the school as a whole. And in some of the schools that we worked with, there were really broad scale whole school changes that were happening as well that very much fundamentally changed the pedagogy. But for this school in particular, these were the 3 projects that they chose to work on. And then they use some more professional development tools that are in the book to really plan out how are they going to take those things from an idea to actually putting them into practice. So as an example, this is a theory of action diagram that they created using one of those tools to try to sort of explain what their rationale was, that if they started to use thinking routines in classrooms, that would really help students to become more confident in terms of generating questions, finding solutions, and becoming independent problem solvers. So we asked them to really go through that exercise of not just thinking of here's what a great idea would be, but also, okay, so how do we make that into something that's happening in practice now? And they started to practice and pilot these changes in a couple of different settings, sometimes in individual classrooms, but also in professional development sessions. They were doing things like role-playing thinking routines to try them out before they got in front of students and were using them. And eventually they were able to roll this out, collect a lot of data about the impact that these changes in practice were happening, and really start to learn from that as well. And that helped them to share the work that they were doing with others, and also to spread it across their school, and to even start sharing the work that they were doing with other schools. And so what you see here is sort of a bird's eye view of this big 2-year journey that they went through. And by the way, the other schools have tried out this approach on different timescales. So it's not something that necessarily needs to unfold over the course of as long as this school took to do it, but they were part of a 2-year research project. So that was part of the nature of it. But we call this overall process the roadmap for inquiry-driven innovation. And I'm just going to, again, show a QR code and a website link as well. If you're interested in taking a deeper look at this roadmap, you can do that there as well. It's one of the free resources on the book website. And of course, it's talked about a lot more in the book as well. And this roadmap is just one part of an overall framework for inquiry-driven innovation. And we're going to get into the rest of that right now. And I'll pass that over to Liz.
Great, thank you. So to reiterate what Andrea said, we developed this framework in conjunction with the teachers that we were working with. So we didn't set it out with all of this sort, in our minds and then had the teachers enact it. We actually built it along with them. And here again is our definition. Note that it's ongoing. It's about individuals and communities. And here we see that promoting positive school-based change is empowering to the very teachers and communities who are engaged in it. So in this way, we have teacher professional development and change kind of going hand in hand. And we know we're not the only ones who've made that connection before. And again, very important that what the schools were doing felt relevant and meaningful for the context and the students they were working with. The next slide. So we identified 3 elements of this concept, inquiry-driven innovation. So the first is innovation, with this idea that if you're working with a group of people towards an innovation, it makes that working in a group all the more powerful. And adding an inquiry lens to what you're doing kind of drives that innovation forward. A lot of people do, as this conference suggests, work that's based on inquiry. But our teachers found it really helpful to ground their inquiry together in the innovation. And so we found these 3 elements for like mutually reinforcing and the 3 key ingredients. We'll move to the next slide. And over time, we came to distill the 5 things that seemed really important to make inquiry-driven innovation work. So the first is whatever's going on to be purposeful and intentional. And that means not just identifying an innovation that would be meaningful for the school, but also thinking at each step of the way, what are we doing and why are we doing it? The second piece of the pie is being attentive to multiple perspectives. So most of the groups we worked with, intentionally, we asked that teachers be at different stages of their careers with different levels of responsibilities and different departments. So we put together groups of teachers who wouldn't ordinarily work together, and that helped bring different perspectives to the work. And they really made an effort to talk to students, teachers, parents, different stakeholders, so they could really develop something which was informed by different perspectives within the school. We also encouraged them to borrow resources that they wouldn't normally kind of look at or draw from. So on all levels, multiple perspectivity, if you like, was very important. Third, and linked to what we've said already, this adapting to context was so important. In some of the schools, they named their innovations in a way that made it feel like it belonged to them. In fact, in the case of Modern, the Futurist curriculum that they developed was one that they felt really proud of, and it was kind of bespoke to their school. Inquiry-driven innovation is not a one-off workshop like what we're doing here. It's sustained and iterative over time, and lots of people have found that change in school is more meaningful if teachers have the time to dig into the work, develop bonds with the people they're working with, meet on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And also change is hard. It's really hard without that sustained period to really have things start to change in your school. And then finally, it does need to be structured and supported. Andrea and I, in writing this book, are trying to offer some structures that teachers themselves don't necessarily have the time to invent or create themselves, but some level of administrative support we found to be super helpful, and time for teachers to meet and do this work. Okay, next slide. Now, in the case of Modern, and we have a case study that describes in more detail what they did in the book. They found that it was, in terms of limitlessness, it was helpful to build on existing assets. So some of the after-school curriculum they already had in place, their interest in STEAM and project-based learning that already existed in the school. So building on what they already had, which was considerable. And then building around. And let's think back to that poll we took right at the beginning. And you also saw in their wishes, challenges and opportunities. Time was a huge problem at this school. It was an incredibly busy, large school, things happening all the time. But the teachers tried to find creative ways, which involved working sometimes asynchronously on WhatsApp and leaving little video messages for each other. They tried to be creative to push back past some of the scheduling challenges they faced. And also the principal was creative in trying to create moments in the school day where teachers could get together to work. A big challenge in this school was the curriculum that they were supposed to follow. And that was something else we saw come up on the poll. The Indian curriculum that they were following was quite content heavy. But over time, they came to see it not as a hurdle, a giant wall that they couldn't get over, but as something to move through. And they used their innovations to kind of hit what they needed to do on the curriculum, but not feeling that they were beholden to it. So we thought that would be interesting for you to see and come back to that. And I just want to mention that some schools, as Andrea said, did much more, specific things in their innovations, like a school-wide rubric to promote critical thinking, or in the case of another Indian curriculum school, which up till then had been using a more traditional pedagogy, they actually fundamentally shifted the kindergarten classes in particular from desks in rows to mats on the floor and a kind of a more Reggio Emilia style pedagogy, if you're familiar with that. Move to the next slide. Okay. So just to kind of wrap up, and we want to allow times for questions and answers, bringing you back, if you are interested, the framework that we've briefly outlined, kind of some of the concepts that we've tried to put forward, the case studies, the tools, the roadmap, you'll find them all in the book. We invite you to visit the book website, which, as we said, has got some free tools. Before we shift over to some questions and answers, we'd love it if you would just take a moment to use the chat box to share one insight and or one question that you might be taking away from this very brief session today. Like, what's on your mind? What's kind of grabbed your attention in what we've just shared? And what's a puzzle or a question that you have? And in fact, those questions could form some of the basis for what we talk about now.
Yeah, so the chat window is starting to bubble up pretty nicely. I know that one of the takeaways that Gloria has is that she wants to tackle this year to reduce the knowledge gap generated in the pandemic in an effective and comprehensive manner. Another challenge, international school is sustainability. Personality versus pedagogy sort of idea. The personalities come and go and the people come and go. So sustainability, connected people, how do you build that sustainability? And another question, no questions as yet, but these are definitely comments that are coming up in the chat window. We'd definitely love to read the book and see some of the examples of innovation that you've just talked about. So folks, please feel free to share your insights or question that you're taking away from today's session. And as we hit the top of the hour, we're actually going to move into the reflection huddle. So what I'm going to ask is for Andrea to move along to the next slide, and we'll capture some of those questions.
Sure, and we actually had some follow-up resources that we wanted to offer as well. And and if there are any questions that Liz and I could speak to in the last few minutes, we're very happy to do that as well. But we wanted to let you know about the book website. So that includes things like some of the testimonials from some of the educators we worked with, some free tools from the book as well as a trailer video. If you just have 5 minutes and would like to learn a little bit more, that's a great place to learn more as well. On our conference booth, if you're part of the Hublot, the TIES platform, then you'll be able to see many of those things there as well. The research center that we're part of, Project Zero, we've included their website as well, and we would really encourage anyone that's interested to get in touch and reach out as well.
Beautiful. Thank you, Andrea. I think we're going to be able to have some questions in the session as it bubbles up in the next few slides. So if you want to share the next slide. So of course, back here, you should all have this session Padlet. So a big part of TIES 2022 is to support you in transferring your classroom and school and where that learning is going to be at. Please find the link to the Padlet for this session in the chat window. This one is also in your session description and in the agenda. Liz and Andrea have added lots of resources for you, and they've given you so many more through their inquiry website. So please go ahead and make sure that you check out those free resources. And also feel free to try anything else that has stood out to you. And I think we've got some opportunities, if you go to the next slide, to have some more questions that have actually bubbled up in the chat window just as I've been talking. So a few people want to know how to get in touch with you. I think my colleague has dropped your email into the chat window as well. So one wondering that's coming from Emma is she loves the idea of building on and building around. I wonder how much we can break it down and remove those challenges. Wonder if you want to talk a little bit about that, the removing of challenges in schools.
Andrea, do you want to start off, or shall I jump in?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I can dig into that a little bit more. I think this idea of building on and building around was something that really came up from the case study of this particular school, because curriculum did stand out to them so much as a barrier, and it really took quite an extended period of time for them to start thinking of things like time, curriculum, staff turnover, some of the things that we always hear about as things that could be transformed into opportunities. And I don't think there's one way to do that the same with every different challenge that we're facing. But I think just even the exercise for the school and for us as researchers to go through this process of thinking about how would we build on what's already at a school? How could we build around some of the challenges? How might we build through some things that are already existing and kind of standing in the way? Just thinking of that idea as building and taking stock of the assets and transforming challenges into opportunities was really powerful, and something that was very much taken directly from the story of that school. What would you add, Lynn?
Yeah, I'd just add that, I think the reality is, if you're an individual teacher, there are some things within your control and there are some things that are not in your control. So what we tried to do with this book is kind of create tools and resources that feel doable, that regardless of what whether or not you're in charge of the school, you can do. And if you are in charge of the school and have more leeway, even then, there are probably going to be some things that are beyond your power to change. So it's kind of working with what you've got. I'll just mention the last few years, we've actually been building on this work and working with the Innova schools of Peru, so a very different network of schools. And there we've been working with the network as a whole, rather than kind of individual schools and classrooms. So, I think there are different ways to approach it, but it's an excellent question. Many things we would love to wave a magic wand and have schooling be different, or change the grammar of schooling, as our colleague Joel Mater at the Ed School says. But this book is really, it's with teachers in mind, and recognizing there are many constraints that many teachers face.
Yeah, I think that speaks to a little bit to the question that Emma, I hope I'm getting this right, Homerline asked. Through your research, the schools worked on building on and building around. Did you see much breaking down? Schools being able to identify and break down those challenges to innovate inquiry. Have you seen schools that have managed to really ditch a lot of the old practices and really innovate?
Actually, Andrea, can I jump in and tell them about the kindergarten starters as an example? So the one school where I think we saw the most dramatic change was a school called Kindergarten Starters, though it has actually since changed its name as a school, which is a bit confusing. But this is an Indian curriculum school, a very large school, and it was catered to 5th grade. And they started putting in some changes into kindergarten. And interestingly, because it came up on the poll, they instantly got some pushback from parents who were a bit worried. Why are the kids not coming home with homework like they used to? What is the school become so poor that you're having kids sit on the floor instead of with their own desk and chairs? These kinds of things, because parents were worried about change. Now, instead of shutting down the innovation, that actually sparked a new one. They instigated a policy called Open Doors, and they invited all the parents, and literally hundreds of parents came in on a rotating basis to come and sit in the classroom, to experience what was going on and to give their feedback. And the principal really did an excellent job of being true to her word. And in truth, most parents were excited about what they saw and actually astonished at the sophistication of the ideas that their children were coming up with. And they gave some feedback, some of it which was constructively used. But that was a really powerful example of a school leaning in to situations as they arose and kind of sparking new innovations instead of getting stuck. And they've really had amazing success in turning around the pedagogy of their school.
It's a really incredible story, and it would be wonderful to have more parents lean in with us in our classrooms, for sure, to see exactly what their students are doing in a given day, to kind of take away a lot of those barriers of learning. We're going to shift into our reflection session now. So if you would turn to the next slide, I've got a couple of housekeeping rules that kind of help us in this next part of our time together. Pretty much, you are free to drop off if you want to and see what's coming up next in your agenda. We're going to go into our reflection huddle. I love this idea of huddling for the all access pass holders. And you should be keen to hang out with us for a little while longer. If you go to the next slide, I'll pretty much guide you to where to head off to the next sessions. I'm kind of like that lady at the door of the conference hall that guides you to the next sessions as you leave the room. So to head to these sessions, just simply click in your agenda in the TIES 2022 platform so that you can head off to the next sessions. If you go to the next slide, please. And of course, once you're in the agenda, you can filter for today's date. So I'm working off a multiple day agenda. So I know that everybody across the world can work on through our platform. And of course, and the session types will also be there as well. And then just click join the session of your choice. So I think we're on the slide now where you can go ahead and click the session of your choice. So if you're free pass, get ready to catch the live stream of the next masterclass that's coming up next. But before we close out, for those of you that might like to explore Toddle further, so if you could go to the next slide, and I think it's the next one after that, and the next one after that. So before we close out, those of you that might like to explore Toddle further, Toddle is your all-in-one teaching partner and it is used by over 1,000 schools worldwide. Scan this QR code or email hello@toddleapp.com and let's have a chat on how Toddle can make 10 times the difference at your school and certainly spark some inquiry innovation in terms of your collaborative planning and all things to do with your written, taught and assessed curriculum. And for those of you, if you move to the next slide, that want to start your break now, please feel free. And for those of you that would like to hang out in the 15-minute reflection huddle on this keynote, please click on the rooms at the top of the event platform and find the room by this name. You can join as soon as the session ends here. Last slide, I promise. I'll go into the reflection housekeeping, which pretty much is what we'll do when we get into the slide, if you just want to keep going. So in the rooms, the speaker will not be able to hear or see you at any point. You can join them on stage though, and you can raise your hand. Next button, you'll have a chance to enable your audio and your video and apply changes. You can be a spectator, so you can listen to all the dialogue, or you can go ahead and be on stage and have a conversation with us all. And finally, last part, to leave the room, you click on the red icon next to the raise hands feature at the bottom of the screen. Next slide. So as we go into our rooms for prompting for reflection, we'll start by using this particular prompt. So how is the inquiry-driven innovation work connected to something that you know about or have experienced? So I'm just popping into our room right now. So I'm wondering about new ideas or impressions that have extended our thinking or new innovations. So I hate to tell you all, but I'm in my room all by myself. So I'm wondering about thinking about new directions. Certainly from what I was learning through the I'm working with a school right now, a very small school, and I actually find myself going to order the book because we've been having this conversation. And actually just this afternoon, we had a wonderful Zoom meeting about interdisciplinary, and we got excited when we discovered that it wasn't just going to be 2 subjects, but we were going to be 3.
And Chris, I just want to ask, should Andrea now get into that room, or where are we at with that?
That's totally up to you. Listen, Andrea,
Yeah,
if you want to, yeah, that'll be great.
Yeah, I'm in the room. Yeah.
Okay, so we can actually we can all just meet there. Yeah, we can leave here.
Great, so I'll
See you there.
stop share and yeah, that. Okay, great, thanks.
All right, see you there. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.